Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Hello and welcome to LinkedUp. This is Jerri and Jamie here today, and we pride ourselves in making sure that we are diverse in the types of podcast topics that we offer. Don't forget, we have our choice boards that are themed based on the different themes of episodes that we have. And one of the themes is on cultural responsiveness. And in addition to that, Jerri, as you may know, Jerri and I work for ClassLink, and we offer these annual diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging summits that are so fantastic. And we have learned so much in these. And one of the things that comes up a lot is hiring practices, what people can do to be better leaders, to make their organizations more inclusive, more diverse. And we're going to be digging into some of these leadership strategies today, Jerri. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes. And Jamie, sometimes I think it's serendipity that when you get to a conference, which I was at recently in Chicago, ERDI, Educational Research and Development Institute, you sit down by someone that just inspires you. That happened to me with our guest today, Dr. Kimberlee Armstrong. We sat down next to each other and just started talking, and I was so excited about the work that she's doing and the way she's making a difference. Then, not even knowing this, we have more conversations, and I find out she's written a book on intersectional leadership. And so I was quite intrigued with her book. She even gave me a signed copy. I've been using it with my leadership group at ClassLink. And so I am more than honored and excited to have Dr. Kimberlee Armstrong with us as our guest today. So welcome.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to being in conversation with you.
Absolutely. Well, I want to start out by asking you the question, what is intersectional leadership? Because I think that's kind of a new term. Is it, Kimberlee?
It is. And so I I was really thinking about what really would speak to the work and the leadership action that I think really gets at improving the way that we support employees, those we serve and those we supervise, and oftentimes they're the same individuals. So the concept of intersectional leadership is rooted in a broader idea of intersectionality. So there's a legal scholar and civil rights activist, Miss Crenshaw, who in the late 80s developed the idea of intersectionality. And it really talks about how different social groups intersect with each other and how that intersection and intersectionality creates unique experiences of discrimination and privilege. And so I really wanted to take that idea and really talk about what happens in the workplace and strategies to overcome some of those unique experiences that impact individuals who sit in the center of intersecting social identities.
Absolutely. Was there something on your journey that got you interested in this?
Yes. Well, let me first share. So I have the pleasure of serving now as Chief Academic Officer in Portland Public Schools, and it is a wonderful place to be. I will tell you that I started in public education about 20 years ago. In the book, I think it's page 88, I have different stories in the book, or maybe it's page 80, where I share like letters to a boss from just the different impacts that an employee has faced. And I think of my very first day as an employee in public education. In education, as you know, the first day typically is a staff meeting, those in-service days. And I remember my very first day in my school district. in my school and with the other educators, and I was so excited. I was late to come into education because I did other things with a nonprofit and just really trying to land where I would spend my career, what that profession would be. And so I was super excited. I applied at a job fair, and so I received like a letter of intent. So without even going through an intense process at a school district, I actually had a couple of different offers, right? So that was exciting. So I went in to my space with a ton of excitement. And I remember the principal, the district was just coming off of a lawsuit, a racial lawsuit, where it was the largest, I think, settlement for a school district because of racism, discrimination, and harassment. And so I think there were some goals in place to like hire and retain diverse staff, right? Goals that still exist 20 years later. But anyway, so I remember that. And in the staff meeting, I was sitting with a group of educators and they were quizzing me, like, what was your hiring process like? And, we were all told that you were coming. Um, and I thought that was odd because, when they said that we were told like in February that you would be coming. And I'm thinking, who was me? Who was you? And I realized that the U stood for an African American. And then in that same meeting, I had another individual, share like, I just don't know what to call my Black students. When I call them Black, they say African American. When I say African American, they say call me Black. So I just decided I'm going to call them the dark ones. And I was thinking to myself, this is the first day of my new career and like, wow. And so anyway, to make the long story short, over the last, I would say 15 years in and out of schools, I realized that there are things that often aren't talked about. And I'm responsible for developing a team that's leading some pretty big initiatives. And I thought if I were to put something out into an open space, what would I want to talk about? And really, it's about the way that we hire, the way that we retain, and the way that we promote diverse employees. Those small actions that we can take. And I really think that's the why um, that I would say.
Is the I'm sorry, yeah, is the umbrella to all of that perhaps the culture? Is that part of this that really kind of ties it all together?
Absolutely, workplace culture. I would say those strategies that employees have, and often, as you all are former educators, right? Or I say once an educator, always an educator. Um, but we are in systems where oftentimes people are promoted based on skill, and we have a lot of people in leadership roles who may have never been through different, I would say, learning or spaces about what it means to be a leader of individuals, what it means to be, quote unquote, a boss. Um, and so I was really writing with that audience in mind, like, okay, you're new to a leadership role, and guess what? You're now charged with hiring and retaining diverse staff because that function doesn't just sit in human resources, right? So what are you going to do about it? And so the book helps to answer those questions.
Well, when we start off with hiring, are there some ideas that you can share with our audience that can help in hiring a diverse group of people in your system?
And let me add to that question, if you don't mind, because I hear a lot of administrators say, well, I put it out into, all of the job postings on the websites. But if I'm not getting the applicants, what else can I do? And I think that's really the big question. Like, what else can they do? Because there are some strategies probably that they can leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say that all sits within equity-based hiring, even starting with looking at the job description, making sure that the language is inclusive. I know that many candidates, particularly candidates of color, do look through those job descriptions to see if some of the things that they're passionate about personally and professionally lives within that job description. And many job descriptions, it does they do really good jobs explaining the technical aspects, but even just those commitments and those beliefs, right? Using that opportunity to talk about equity, to talk about social justice, or even if not even using those terms, but describing their workplace as a place that thrives, that's supportive, and that has structures that employ and supports employees from all spaces, I think is huge. And I think employees, it's more than just, getting that posting out on some of the huge job posting sites, right? It's also about being connected to community organizations, the universities, and others who I would say can help with getting word out to diverse candidates. I think that's a big one. I also think that adjusting the hiring criteria, I think there are so many people who go through job descriptions and will disqualify themselves if they don't um, hit all of the parts of the job description. And I think it's really important to really put those key things out there because we also know that, like, oh, internally, we have individuals who may or may not meet a certain part of the job description, but we know them and we know their skill and they interview anyway. But if it's someone that's outside of the organization and you don't know that, then like what really are those minimum qualifications that are, firm for everyone, right? And then maybe some of those other ones, maybe consider leaving off and then ascertaining that information through the hiring process. And then the last thing I'll say is even doing trainings with staff on identifying those cognitive errors in a hiring process. And cognitive errors are simply those the biases that we hold when we're interviewing individuals. Um, and so training them to look past that when going through the process so that the focus is really on the skills of the potential employee.
Those are really, they almost seem common and simple, but they're not, because especially when you talk about the job description, I think that job descriptions are just repurposed all the time. And you think, oh, yeah, I have a job description, and they put it forward. But do they really look at what it says and what the tone is and what is implied? And if they haven't done that in a while, I think that this is a time to do that. And I think you had some really good, really important points there. I also liked, I'm trying to write these down too. I also like how you mentioned connecting to the community, connecting to the colleges. I think that that's really, a simple approach, but so powerful as well. I like
Right.
that.
And I would even add, like, considering lived experiences and make sure that that is present in the job description because so many of us have more than what
Yeah.
we've been trained to do formally.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're only benefiting your staff, your school, your students, if you are having people with diverse experiences. So really making sure that you are, looking for that, those being inclusive and looking for that diversity. What if there is a school district that is, primarily white or primarily black, but you are trying to make, or Hispanic, just a mix, or Asian, but you're trying to, and that's your student population, and you are trying to make your staff diverse so that the students can see the real world is made up of diverse people, and you are not just going to be taught by white folks or or just Black folks, or just, but you want to have a mix of people, teachers teaching your students. So how do you attract candidates who may look at a student population and say, oh, that doesn't mirror me, so I don't belong there? Is that something that is, important to be considered?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think for many individuals, when we start the conversation around making sure that our population matches the population that we serve in our schools, it's an intimidating conversation. And I think, like many things, when we start talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there is this thing that I think comes up for some folks about, thinking that they're excluded from the conversation or what they have to bring isn't powerful and dynamic. I think it's a simple belief that, the more, I would say, diverse perspective that we bring in the space, the better we are as a collective. And so thinking about what it means to be out and attracting, I would say that, it really starts with, I think we talked about the job description, but then also examining your presence, right? Like if I were to I see a job posting and I'm thinking, okay, this is speaking to me, it's inclusive, it sounds like it would be a position that I'd be successful in. They're considering all parts of who I am. Wonderful. I'm going to go do a little bit of research on the organization, on the school district. And so what I'm looking for is diversity somewhere, right? And even if the diversity isn't there racially, there is a commitment to diversity, right? So what are they posting about publicly? Do they have like a diversity or race and equity type policy that speaks to the actions that they're committed to as an organization? Do they spend any parts of their day talking about some of the, I would say, leading topics around diversity, equity, and inclusion? And are there committees and opportunities where I know that while I might be a single person going in, that it isn't going to be, um, you know, no conversation around the topic of diversity. I would say that that's huge. So not only the examination of the hiring process, the interview committees, the training that they receive, the adjustments to job descriptions, making sure that there's a level of inclusivity, but also that external evaluation of how you present to candidates. And sometimes just getting feedback from candidates that's recently went through the hiring process that are belong to a diverse social group, I would say would be a great place to start.
That's a good idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Kimberlee, one of the things that really caught my ear when we were talking is after you've hired someone, the onboarding process is critical. And you talk about the first, is it 9 hours?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Tell us about that. I thought this was fascinating.
Right. Thank you. So the book is made up of a variety of frameworks and theories. And so one of the frameworks that I looked at was symbolic interaction. And this was created by sociologists back in the early 1900s. And it's really just that idea of how symbols, language, gestures, objects, the way that we communicate, um, present to others. And so when I think about the onboarding experience, I think of the onboarding experiences that I've experienced or haven't, and the power that has in an organization. So when I think about like the first 9 hours, one of the things that I'm focusing on is how are organizations creating holistic approaches to bringing individuals into an organization. And really, that first 9 hours is representing, like, 2 days or, the first couple of hours of that first week, saying, like, how have you've been intentional about making sure that that individual has the opportunity to connect with people, to connect with their space, and to really learn the supportive structures that exist in their organization. And my belief is that all of those things need to be presented within the first 9 hours. It's kind of really built on Simon Sinek's notion of why, and really helping individuals connect to the organization's why, whether it's a school district or a school, like connecting to that why, and then them seeing themselves in it. Really, the book is also, I would say, a frame for those who are wanting to talk about workplace resilience. And like, what is that? Workplace resilience. It's a new term for some people and an archaic term for others, but really it's the idea of having individuals with a high degree of self-efficacy and I would say effectiveness. And as we know, self-efficacy is about the belief in one's ability to accomplish the task, right? And of course, being effective is actually completing those tasks. But I think the underlying part of that, the stage that needs to be created for our employees to stand on, is creating the conditions that allow them to have the belief that they can be successful and that they will be successful.
First impressions are powerful, right?
Yes. That's exactly it.
I love that, creating the conditions to help people to be successful. I think that's really powerful. And I think the workplace resilience has become quite a popular term after the pandemic.
Yeah.
What are we seeing as resilience? Are we seeing people are bouncing back easily, or what have you seen, Kimberlee, in your research?
Well, I will tell you the data that I had a chance to look at was just the qualitative statements of what individuals are saying about the return to work. I know that I was in a system that there was some reluctancy to return back. And there's so much to unpack with that, right? For many, being home for over a year, working from home, while we know that's not the best condition for learning for students long term, I think for some it was restoring. It created that opportunity for them to be back connected. For individuals that sat in spaces that they thought were harmful or hurtful, the opportunity to be removed from that and to begin that whole internal work, so that when they're back in their external environment, they would have the strength and the capacity to deal with that. I really think just that sense of belonging and support, uh, being at home, I think was created within the structure that they were familiar and comfortable with. And then returning back after the pandemic, that safety net for I think some I heard from was definitely missing. And so that's one way that I would respond to that.
And when we talk about resilience, are there things that leaders can do to help employees become more resilient? I know you mentioned having structures in place to support them. What do those look like?
Yeah, so going back to the onboarding, some of the things that I talk about in the book, and I will say, just because an employee may have been with the organization for a few years doesn't mean that they can't be re-onboarded, right? And then
Ah,
the other thing that
that's
I
interesting. Yes.
yeah, and the other thing that I would note is that, oftentimes when people are promoted internally, they don't go through that like you're coming from the outside onboarding experience, yet in a certain way that they are from the outside. Maybe they're from a school coming into district office or they're moving from one world to another. My belief is that that onboarding process should start, right? Again, so I would just say that strategies that organizations can use is just making sure that there is a review of the history and the mission of the organization, that the structure is clear, that that's communicated over and over again. The culture and values of the organization are leading and upfront. And then the significance that individuals play in the organization, that they know their role, right? Motivation is always a huge thing to talk about when talking about resilience. And it's important that individuals see themselves in the why, and that they're able to connect, right? So that they have a deeper sense of purpose. And there's this commitment that begins to take shape within that first day. And it's that commitment that then leads us to the retention and the promotion, and hopefully a longer stay during an employee's work life cycle.
I like that reset concept. I think that's important. Yeah, I think that's great, for everyone, but also, keeping that alive. And I think that's the hardest part. It is hard, when you get on with your school year and then you're bombarded with, all of the compliances and, state requirements and testing and all of that. So there needs to be some intentionality, though, to keep that that proud culture alive and to keep it going.
Yeah, another point I wanted to make is that sometimes it feels performative, and people can see right through that. So it really has to be authentic and baked into that culture in order for people to believe it. You can't just have the sign on the wall about equity and think that's going to take care of it.
And what are some tips for getting the staff involved? Because you don't want it to be top down, right? It has to be something in order for it to truly be authentic, and or in order for it to be pervasive and carried through from leadership, from students, teachers, leadership, everyone. What are some suggestions for helping to keep that important culture alive?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And whether we're talking about onboarding, whether we're talking about the hiring process, whether we're talking about retention, what I always like to call out is affinity groups and affinity groupings. I will say that that is something that I'm starting to hear and see more and more in different organizations, different schools, different school districts. And so, really, the idea of affinity grouping is a group coming together around, or that they share an identity or an interest, and they're coming together for mutual support, to share knowledge and experiences, and to take action. And oftentimes, in an affinity grouping, in the beginning stages, the take action part is missing or not yet there. And I think that's okay to start with. But I believe in all of our work when it comes to equity is about getting to action. I should also say that I've mentioned equity a few times, and I don't like not defining that or what I mean when I say equity. I believe that equity is a byway to justice, right? And justice to me is that ultimate act of making sure that privilege is distributed among a group, that there's equal access to privileges and resources and all of the things that are required to be successful, right? Like for me, that the equity helps get you there. It just sometimes takes an alternative route because the route that we've been on isn't working. So first, let me call that out. But affinity groups, right? An opportunity for employees to come together and be in community with one another, to be supportive of one another, really thinking about the intersectionality of individuals and those unique experiences that they have when they sit in the intersection. So I would definitely say affinity groups are one. And affinity groups have been around for a very long time, right? They didn't necessarily have the maybe formal title of affinity groups, and I don't know where that topic came from. I've been trying to dig into who officially termed it that. But when you think throughout our history, groups that come together who share a common identity, being in communication, in community with each other, focusing on their communication and their action to the outside world, most times have been around some of those social causes and action within that. but I would say leveraging that in school districts or in school communities would be a great place to have the conversation begin about, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Um, what support do you need? And then what action are you suggesting that we take for whatever that topic may be, onboarding or hiring and retention? What was your experience, um, and what might you offer to help change practice?
Yes, that's great advice. I wonder what other advice you would give to aspiring leaders that want to embrace intersectional leadership instead of traditional leadership.
Oh, that's such a great question, and realize that I don't have like an hour to answer that.
And I
I
could
think,
listen to you for another hour.
oh, that's
You
sweet.
are.
That's sweet. I think what I would say is really lead with the risk and resilience framework in mind. The risk and resilience framework does a great job of capturing what it means to be a resilient individual, right? So there's the risk factors that we know are assigned to different groups, right? Whether it's poverty or like a health factor or simply, you know, maybe it's, someone coming from an environment with like other impacts, like drug and alcohol abuse or whatever those are, right? Whether they're a young person or an adult, depending on what their life experiences has been or how they're showing up, we determine quickly if they have risk factors or not. And the risk and resilience framework says that, the higher the risk, the higher the need for protective factors, right? So when we think of those programs that we create when we know that, for instance, a student isn't attending school, right? That's a risk factor. So then we think, what are those protective factors to mitigate that risk? Oh, maybe it's, having a person who is monitoring attendance and calling home or doing home visits, like all of those protective factors. If you take the risk and protective factor concept on a broader scale and think about what it means in your leadership, I would say to that new leader, think of the risk factors that your individual employees hold, and then think about those protective factors that you're responsible for having in place to mitigate the risk. And when I say risk or the at risk of leaving the workplace, right? Not retaining, or the self efficacy is low, or the actual job performance is low, right? Like we don't give up on individuals, right? We create those protective factors to mitigate the risk so that our employees can show up and be their best selves. And that responsibility is on us.
That's a really great practical way to think about that. I'm sure there are so many others. You said you could go on for another hour talking about that. But I think what you've just done is zoomed in on something very practical that leaders can do by really analyzing the risk and then therefore analyzing, okay, again, it's that call to action, right? So not just identifying the risk, but now, okay, what are those protective factors? How are we going to mitigate? What can we do to prevent, to reduce risk, to whatever it may be? And again, it's a simple approach to that, and it's a tool, I think, that they can really just pull out anytime they feel sort of like helpless, or maybe something might get swept under the carpet otherwise, or maybe something can just easily be overlooked, but really being intentional about using that tool. I think that's very, very powerful.
I wanted to say too, Kimberlee, your book is so well written and so
Sounds like it.
full, full of information. I think it should be a textbook for aspiring leaders. I really do, because there are so many examples and frameworks and things that you could lean on as a leader to help you to be able to hold your employees up to to be the best they can be.
Sounds like a very good leadership book study this summer, actually.
Oh, it would be a terrific book study. Yes, it's just incredible, the work that she's done and the depth that she's gone in her writing. So
Well,
quite impressive.
I certainly appreciate that. And I think it definitely helps being in a workplace environment right now where I feel like I can be my best self. I am super impressed and proud of the leadership team, for starting with our superintendent to all of the individuals that are across the organization. And while we know in school systems, we always have things to work on, we always have dials to move. But to feel every day that you're walking into a space where the belief in your ability to do that work is high, and the effectiveness and the accomplishment, I think, that occurs in small doses throughout the day and throughout the week is also inspiring, whether that's for me or my team. I think I get the most excited when my team is performing well, when they feel well and they perform well, and they feel the support. I think that inspires me.
Oh, absolutely. Well, in all of your work and your research, and you have done so much research, we like to ask the question, what has become clear?
I would say what's really clear to me after writing this book and being in conversation about it is humans are excited and ready to be in support of one another. There are definitely a lot of conversations where things aren't going well in our world, in different spaces that we work in, that we live in, that we socialize in. But at the end of the day, as a collective, we want our actions and our behaviors to be humanizing, to move together as a collective. And many times we just need the tools to do it. Think you heard me say earlier, we don't give up on humans. And I think the more and more I'm hearing people say that and their actions demonstrate that. And I think what's clear to me is that the more we show up with the attitude that we don't give up on humans, that we continue to center ourselves as learners, and that we are responsible for uplifting the resilience of our organization, then the stronger and better we'll be, not only as an individual, but in our organizations as a whole.
Absolutely. Kimberlee, I have to say, I can hardly keep up. I'm just taking notes after notes after notes. You are so inspiring. And your background and work really inspires, I think, all of us to be better leaders and to be better humans and to support each other. Which
it sounds like your district is very, very lucky to have you. And I think that your book that you've written seems like a gift that you were able to share, not just with your expertise with your own district, but now with everyone. So, and Jerri, we talked about starting this summer a book giveaway. This might be a fun one to start with, actually.
This would be terrific.
Yeah.
This would be terrific because, Kimberlee, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you can be a leader at any level, and what you find in your book can be applied to the classroom or to the superintendent's seat. Yes. It can be applied anywhere.
Absolutely. I believe that I wrote with all different audiences in mind. And I have to say that, we're a proud ClassLink school district, and I have a colleague who often uses this quote, and it's, "We can do hard things." And he is known for saying that. And so saying it is one thing, having a group of people who believe that is another. And I think my hope and my wish is that groups of individuals move through spaces knowing and believing that they can do hard things. Because as Renard Adams says, in Portland Public Schools, we can do hard things, and we absolutely believe it.
Oh, that is fantastic. How can people find you and your book?
Oh, okay. Well, that's wonderful. So I'm at DRK Armstrong on Twitter. And also the book is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble online. So Intersectional Leadership, Strategies for Building a Resilient Workplace.
Yes. Oh, and it is terrific. I'll give it a 10 for sure. So 10 out of 10. It is wonderful. Well, Kimberlee, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to be on our podcast and share your expertise in leadership and helping others to become the best they can be. I know that people walked away with nuggets of things that they can use, and I suspect many are ready to buy that book too. So
good. Thank you. Anything that I can do to be in service, I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.